When the tree is felled and first cut, most of the time these days the tree is actually cut what we call through and through. So it will be stuck through a large bandsaw or band resaw and cut into planks in this direction. The annual rings on the end grain vary very much depending where you take the plank out of the tree. The centre of the tree is always the pith. That's basically the sapling. That is not a good bit of timber we want to be using with our furniture. We're always going to have issues from it. The boards either side of that are quarter sawn boards, and the annual rings are going through here pretty much at 90 degrees. These are the prized boards out of the tree. They're the most stable boards, and also they're going to be more expensive. The boards to the outside here, the annual rings go round. The boards here, the annual rings are now flat sawn, or what we call tangential sawn. And the movement factor between a quarter sawn board and a tangential board is really quite different. The annual rings and the vessels within them will always grow and shrink. The problem we have with the boards out here, the flat sawn or tangential boards, is this line of annual rings here might be maybe an inch long or maybe 2 inches long. On the outside here that might be up to 6 inches long. As those vessels shrink, the 6-inch long one will shrink 3 times more than the 2-inch one, and it'll pull the board round. And all these annual rings try to flatten out over time, and it pulls the board round. And we'll see examples of that over here. This board is a centre board. This is very much quarter sawn, so you'll see the annual rings are very square on the end, and what we're then getting is very straight grain coming up through the board. We also have the pith in here. We don't want this. We want to cut that piece out and keep the 2 straight grain boards from it. Some quarter sawn boards will be quite bland and straight. Some quarter sawn boards look fantastic. On this lacewood, the medullary rays that are seen on a quarter sawn board really come to life, and the same on this English oak. This quarter sawn just looks great. The board alongside them is the flat sawn board or a tangential board. You can see from here the bark was basically going around almost at 45 degrees, so the tree would have been coming around here somewhere. This board gives you a different grain effect. We now get a crown cut or cathedral looking grain, which can be much more interesting. The issue with this board is as the annual rings try and straighten, the board will always cup, and they will tend to go round. The third piece we get out of here is what we call a rift sawn piece, and the annual rings are going through at about 45 degrees. This means for a leg of a table we always look like we've got straight grain. I'll show you where the rift sawn comes from. This piece here, the annual rings are now coming through at almost 45 degrees, and that will give you a rift sawn looking piece. So depending where it comes out of the tree, it depends on the kind of grain structure it'll look like, and also the amount of movement we will have. Quarter sawn board will always move about half as much as a tangential or flat sawn board, and we will use those within our constructions to the best effect. So this is a mock-up of a door. It's just a sample one, it's not glued up, but in here we have the stiles and the rails are quarter sawn, which means dimensionally they're very stable, but they're a bit like a picture frame. There's a frame around the canvas. The canvas of the picture is beautiful. We now have a crown cut or tangential flat sawn board with this lovely cathedral grain. And we try and choose that cathedral grain so it's pointing upwards. Christmas trees point upwards. These panels would not normally be glued in position. If we glued them all the way around, they would end up cracking. And we normally polish these centre panels before we glue up the frame. And the polish stops the glue coming out the corners and sealing this panel in. This is a box I made many years ago. The top solid timber panel sits within a groove. It's not glued in there, and as this grows and shrinks throughout the year, it can still move, but it doesn't fall out because it's trapped within the groove. Another place we'll use this grain to our advantage is on this table I've made. This tabletop is using a crown cut or flat sawn timber, which is very attractive. If we made this in one wide board, it would probably end up like a fruit bowl. It would move all over the place. So it's actually made in 3 pieces. If you look at the end grain, the 2 outside boards what we call smiling. The end grain is looking upwards. The centerboard is frowning, it's going downwards. This means overall this board will stay flat. This one will bow a little bit, that'll bow a bit, and that'll bow the same as this one, which is what we're trying to actually achieve overall. This tabletop will not grow in its length, but it will grow and shrink in its width over the year. So we won't just fix him solid down to this frame, we must allow for movement. Two ways of doing for that. That's a metal shrinkage plate. The metal shrinkage plate could be screwed onto the back apron rail. And then depending where we put a screw, if we put a screw through this top slot, it will be able to grow and shrink as the year goes on. If we had a shrinkage plate on the side apron rail, we would turn it round by 90 degrees, and now we'd use the other slot and let the screw move up and down. They're very functional, but they're not very attractive. A much more traditional way and a better quality way is to use what we call a button. And this button fits into the mortise in the back rail. It goes into there, it's not glued in. Screw goes up through the button into the tabletop, which holds the tabletop down, but it allows the tabletop to grow and shrink throughout the year. The other piece that are in here are the apron rails, and again those apron rails are quarter sawn, so they're dimensionally very stable. We don't want this drawer that goes in here to only fit 1 week a year, it's got to fit all year long. So quarter sawn will be used for the apron and also the drawer side as well. And the legs on this one are rift sawn, so 45 degrees through on the end grain gives you the same grain effect on all 4 sides of the leg. For this one over here, again we've got some quarter sawn oak in this handmade drawer, so it's going to be very stable. And the drawer bottom is quarter sawn cedar of Lebanon. All these elements are the things we're looking at when we're making our furniture for choosing the best grain that's not going to move, it's going to look attractive and last over the years.